Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, and I'm the founder and president of the Pixel Project. I'm the moderator for today's panel, which is held in honor of the launch of Under Her Eye, the first charity poetry collection under our Read for Pixels campaign. Now, the collection was published in partnership with Black Spot Books on November 7th, 2023, and proceeds from the sales of the book will go towards supporting the Pixel Project's anti-violence against women program, campaigns, and resources. So today's YouTube session is also our 22nd Read for Pixels live stream panel since we started hosting panels in 2018. The Pixel Project created these multi-author panel sessions to be an accessible resource for writers interested in writing about female characters and approaching themes such as misogyny, sexism, gender, and violence against women with depth, empathy, and accuracy. Now, to celebrate Under Her Eye being out in the world this month, today's panel topic will be Under Her Eye, the role of horror poetry in raising awareness about violence against women. And here to participate in the discussion are three award-winning horror authors and editors who are part of Under Her Eye. So we'll go in alphabetical order. So below me is Karina Bissett. Karina is an award-winning writer and editor working primarily in the fields of dark fiction and fabulism. Her fiction and poetry has been published in numerous journals and anthologies. Her debut collection, Dead Girl, Driving, and Other Devastations, is coming in 2024. Lee Murray, next to Karina. Lee is a multi-award winning writer and poet and a 5-time Bram Stoker Awards winner, including for poetry for Tortured Willows. NZSA Honorary Literary Fellow. Lee is a Grimshaw is it Sargson or Sargson?
Sargson. Yeah.
Sargson Fellow and winner of the NZSA Laura Solomon Cuba Press Prize for forthcoming prose poetry collection Fox Spirit on a Distant Cloud. She's also the winner of the Australian Shadows Award for Poetry, and she is an Elgin Award runner-up and a Riesling Dwarf Star and Pushcart nominated poet. And next to me, last but not least, is Lindy Ryan. Lindy is the Bram Stoker Awards nominated and Silver Falchion Award-winning editor of Into the Forest. She has been named one of horror's most masterful anthology curators. She is the current author in residence at Rue Morgue and was the 2020 Publishers Weekly Star Watch honoree. She is the author of Bless Your Heart. I love that expression, bless your heart, Cold Snap, and more, as well as an award-winning short film director. So you, the audience, will also be able to ask them questions live. Just make sure that you're logged into YouTube and you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Anusha Kandasivam, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Karina, Lee, and Lindy to answer. But before we begin today's discussion, we have a treat. Karina will honor us with a reading of a poem from Under Her Eye, and the title of the poem is Karina, Karina.
Yeah, thank you. Karina, Karina. Seeing stars, they call it, as though cartoon characters and spinning symbols can capture a chokehold. Police lights shifting, spinning from red to blue to red. Haze, a starburst, vessels broken. Petechia spotted on a field of white. Surrender in the keel hauling. Barnacles replaced with the mundane, chains wrought in butter knives, jelly spoons scalloped. Later, I learned my name exists in a ridge of cartilage located low in the trachea. It lies past the throat between the division where airways bifurcate, traveling in opposite directions, a subterranean system leading to lungs that once bellowed, screamed for help until the loop closed, strangled. The next breath nebulous, subdued, drowned by sirens. But there is another course, another Karina, a constellation sailing southern skies, centered on a solitary star, a supergiant in her class, 1,000,000 times brighter than Earth's sun, and I am reborn, radiant.
Thank you so much, Karina. So now we are going to move over to the discussion part of the session. And before we do that, I'll do a little introduction to horror and poetry. So horror as a genre is designed to address and reflect the deepest fears of societies and cultures. And it allows us to explore, deconstruct, and work through these fears in a safe, cathartic, and entertaining way. Uh, Horror has also historically been unkind to women and other female figures. Fortunately, things appear to be changing because we have been seeing the rise of more female centric horror in all its formats, from novels to movies to TV shows to poetry. However, the patriarchy is still far from being eliminated in much of horror. So, in honor of the release of Under Her Eye, today's panel will be discussing how horror poetry can contribute to the fight to end violence against women in the Me Too era, as well as what horror poets can do to help stop violence against women. So, all three of you have been writing horror and dark fiction for a decade or more. Your stories, books, and poetry have feminist sensibilities and are excellent examples of how to write compelling and complex female characters in a genre that hasn't always been kind to women and girls. And you have all come together to make Under Her Eye, the Pixel Project's first ever poetry collection, for our Reaper Pixels campaign. And it's a beautiful reality now. Lee has a copy of the book there, right? So look at the beautiful cover by Lynn Hansen. It's beautiful.
It sure is.
It is.
And it's not just that. The actual interior pages are stunning as well. Just look at that. It's just a perfect coffee table book. So, yeah, absolutely stunning.
Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more later about where everyone can go get the book. But the first question of the day is for Lindy and Lee as co-editors of Under Her Eye. What was the inspiration behind Under Her Eye?
Lindy, you go ahead and then I'll talk about the other bit.
Okay. So Black Spot Books launched our Women in Horror Poetry Showcase last year with Under Her Skin. And Under Her Skin was themed. Oh, thank you, Lee. Lee is my vampire today. Under Her Skin was body horror collection. So the poems in the book spoke to body horror and the complicated relationships that women have with their bodies. And as we grew the showcase series, we wanted to continue talking about themes that were very material and top of mind to women and to women in horror. So domestic horror and violence against women came to the forefront as Lee and I began talking about shaping the second collection. It seemed timely, relevant, and incredibly important. So that's really the inspiration. We wanted to find issues that spoke to women, and we wanted to find issues that needed to be talked about. And Under Her Eye was born.
Mm-hmm. Lee?
Yes, basically that's kind of how it happened. But for me, I have a poem in this beautiful collection. And I was talking to Lindy about it. We were putting together Unquiet Spirits, which is another feminist work. And I'd had my prose poetry story, the Moon Goddess's granddaughter in this book, Giving the Devil His Due, by the Pixel Project, and I snuck a prose poem in here because I was actually asked for a short story, and I think I threw everybody, didn't I, Regina, when I sent a prose poetry narrative story into this collection. And so kind of when Lindy sort of asked me to be co-editor of Under Her Eye, which was like a real honor to be able to work with her, because we'd done a little bit of other things together, and I'd really enjoyed working with her, and it was just a no-brainer to bring the two of you together, because when you start with body horror and then you start talking about violence against women, well, it made sense to put the two of you together, and then look, this collaboration was born. So I feel kind of proud that I somehow managed to sort of keyhole two really important issues and two amazing powerhouse women together, and then look what happens when you the sisterhood is strong, and amazing things can happen when we collaborate. So the inspiration wasn't entirely mine, but just I had the idea to connect you, and so I'm proud of that little contribution.
Yes, absolutely. I should mention, I remember reading Giving the Devil His Due when it came out, and of course I've known Lee for years now and Karina for a long time. We've done many projects together, so the sisterhood is strong, as Lee said, and it's been absolutely incredible to work with everyone and continue growing this platform.
Yeah, it is. It was appropriate as well because, when we started thinking of, when the Pixel Project started thinking of putting together books and anthologies and the way that we use stories to reach people, and not news stories, not survivor stories, but, the holdouts, the people who don't want to listen to all of those, but how can we reach them? And that's how we started getting into the whole, shall we use fiction to reach people? And doing poetry is the next, including poets, and using poetry is actually the next step. And I think it was really appropriate as well that Lee introduced us to Lindy and Black Spot Books, because we have a policy that we put in place when we started thinking about using stories and publishing them, is that we could have gone to one of the big five, because we know editors in the big five after so many years of working on Read for Pixels. But we wanted to make sure that we worked with women-led small press or medium press, because we wanted people who actually would understand what we're trying to achieve. So our first publishing partnership with Running Wild Books, that's led by Lisa Kastner, founded and led by Lisa Kastner. And now the second partnership with Black Spot Books, led by Lindy. It just, hopefully in the years to come, it would just establish a whole thing of, this is who we are, this is who we work with, the sisterhood is there. We are not going to throw anyone over we're not going to go to, size is not everything. I can't believe I just said that, but well, what does Shakespeare say? She be small, but what's that thing, that quote? She be little, but she'll be mighty even if she's little, something like this. And he was talking about one of the female. He was one male character was saying that of a female character, and that's who we are. So we're really looking forward to the years to come, collaborating with Black Spot Books, collaborating with Lindy and Lee and all the poets. So we do have a question for Karina. Karina, why did you decide to contribute an original poem to Under Her Eye? And as Lindy mentioned before we started on air, we went on air, it is a difficult, Lindy and Lee did mention this, that violence against women is a difficult topic to address, even when we are using fiction and literature. So why did you decide to submit the poem to Under Her Eye?
Well, first of all, Lee and Lindy, I admire them both so much, what they do. I had 2 poems published in the first book that Lindy put out with Black Spot Books. And they were both about violence against women. It was body horror, right? And so both of them included that, some from men and also from mothers, because violence isn't always necessarily just from the men in your life, right? And so, and I love that book. And when the second call came out, they only took 1, and so it needed to be something really, really good, right? And so I sat and was looking, and I had gone through my old journals and was throwing them away, going through them and looking for pieces. And one of the things I had was Karina. So I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and I changed my name and my social security number in 2013. So I had a confidential name change and I became a new person. And so I wanted a name, my first name, that was very close to what my birth name was. And so I picked Karina. My birth name was Carrie. And so that way people can call me Carrie and they can still call me Karina. But I didn't realize really what it meant. And so I was looking up my name. I know what Carrie means. It means dear one. So I looked up Karina and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And then I started following the rabbit hole of other words that Karina means. And it actually is part of your body, which seemed perfect. And I had stuck this in this notebook. And And when this call came out, I went and looked at that notebook and I'm like, okay, it's time to write this particular piece about what names mean, right? What identities mean. And then the actual experience of going through a violent episode or more than one. And so that's where it came from. It was very important to me, though, to be in this book. And the thing of it was a very personal poem, so I wasn't sure they would want it. But it felt like that was the one I needed to write. And so that's the one I wrote. And luckily, it was accepted. I was very happy about that.
Well, I can respond to that because, we had an absolute deluge of poems, didn't we, Lindy? And all of them were amazing. I don't think we got any duds. And so choosing, which poems were going to be part of the collection was extremely difficult. And I remember sending notes to Lindy within the submittable going, oh my gosh, we need this one too. But when Karina's came in, it was a no-brainer. It was very easy. I had frisms. I just had them again here, listening to you read it in your own voice. So it was a very easy call, that particular poem. And further down we really struggled with which ones we were going to keep, and I think we were only going to have 100 originally, weren't we, Lindy? And we ended up with
less. Under Her Eye, I think, has just about 80 poems from 80, and there were some that were multiple poets had submitted more than one poem, so we really had to kind of tighten things up for the second one to have more voices, more poems. And our submissions were through the roof. I remember telling Lee, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. There's so many to read. But I think we accepted 112, which was far above the number we budgeted. But they were so many, we just couldn't, say no. And they were important, all of them. And Karina's, of course, is phenomenal. So delighted.
The Shakespeare quote that I couldn't quite remember just now, one of the audience members actually typed it in, and let's see. Though she be but little, she is fierce, by Shakespeare. I think that's like the unofficial motto of most feminists and feminist organizations and women's organizations. Though we be but little, we are fierce. We do a lot, even with what little we have. So let's go to the next round of questions. So to put this into context, for modern horror, we could argue that ever since Mary Shelley put pen to paper to bring us Frankenstein's monster, one of the most enduring horror icons to fictional life, horror authors and creators have used stories and storytelling for tackling important social issues. However, while we have seen plenty of critique about everything from racism to consumerism in classics such as Night of the Living Dead, it seems that the portrayal of women has remained problematic, and issues such as sexism, misogyny, and violence against women continue to be used as convenient shortcut tropes by many horror authors and creators. Indeed, horror novels and movies have long been criticized as contributing to the further normalization of extreme violence against women as entertainment. Interestingly, horror poetry has not been mentioned much in this ongoing cultural conversation, and which has been unfolding over the past decade. So I'm going to put this out to everyone. Do you think there has been any improvements on this front with the Me Too movement kicking off a lot of discussion about these issues, as well as exposing some big name male authors as misogynists and abusers? So let's go clockwise. Let's start with Lindy.
No. Well,
such a big question, isn't it? It's a huge question. I know exactly how you feel.
Yeah, I think Lee is volunteering to take my place.
No.
Well, it's interesting that you start the question mentioning Mary Shelley. And every year there's an article or two that comes out and it talks about the beginnings of horror or the origins of horror or the authors who started horror, and she is every time ignored. And Mary Shelley is like the godmother of science fiction, right? The godmother of Gothic horror, and she's continued to be ignored. And I think that says a lot about women's roles in horror. I am not a poet, so I shall not speak to poetry, but in cinema and film, in literature, the women's roles have been either relegated into the shadows, ignored completely, or we become tropes, or we become final girls. And I think it's time that women in horror rise up and rewrite those endings and rewrite those roles. And whether it's through poetry or through prose or through anything else, being able to take back that power and take back that conversation. Now, in terms of any improvements with the Me Too movement, I think absolutely. I think it brings some transparency, it brings some accountability, and it brings opportunities for women's voices to rise to the top. And I think if nothing else, it's created a path forward for women in horror to be able to speak and share and be part of the conversation that we have been pushed out of, even when it belonged to us to begin with in a lot of ways. So all of those discussions, they're terrible when they happen. They're hard to get through, especially when you see a name that you know or a person that you know come up in that conversation, but they bear fruit, and that fruit is giving power back to women in many cases and letting us speak freely and openly. And there are many women that I know inside the horror community who have been silenced or who have been stepped on. Many are plowed on, trod on, stampeded into the ground. And so one of the biggest improvements I think that's happening is that those voices get to come back up and those women get to stand back up and take their place in the community. And that's a good thing.
Lee, any thoughts?
Wow, that was an excellent answer, Lindy, for someone who said she couldn't go ahead first. But you're absolutely right about Mary Shelley. I believe the book was originally published under her father's name, I think. So I might be wrong there, but it was either a father or a husband. I can't remember. But she didn't have her own name on that book, which I think is basically a metaphor for what you're saying, is that women have been silenced or sidelined in these conversations. And of course, her story is about otherness, isn't it? It's about not fitting in and being ostracized, which is so often the case for women who have had violence, committed against them. And even the families are complicit, or mum is complicit, or, and so there is nowhere to go there. They feel completely trapped. So, but I think in terms of the Me Too movement, I think that certainly it's become a little bit more visible. There's a possibility, there's a little gap in the door where we can just speak through the gap. And I feel like there's an opportunity there that we should be seizing on. And another thing is, when we look at the way horror is evolving, now horror has always been very subversive. So we can always talk about, we've always been able to talk about the things that frighten us and that are dangerous. And so it's the perfect genre for doing this. But also, because of that, we have women like Lindy and like Lisa Kastner, who are the heads of their own publishing companies, who get to have a say. And that's happening more in the horror film, the cinematic industry as well, where we're seeing a lot more women producers and women film directors. Lindy, for example, is a short film director. And I think that has got to be making a difference. People like yourself, Regina, women in places of power or who have a voice and are using that voice to speak for other women who can't, because it is a little bit of a case of they're holding out, but they just can't. They are at risk. They are in fear for their lives or their children's lives or their pets' lives or any, and it's just, it's not a question of they want to, I'm sure, if they just can't, they don't feel able. And so I'm hoping that things are changing and there's an opportunity, that door is just opening a crack and they can slip through. So.
What about you, Karina? What do you think?
Oh, I've got so many thoughts. Yeah, Frankenstein was published anonymously originally. And one of the striking things about that particular book is that the women don't really have a voice, which I think is really kind of interesting. And so the female monster that was made, the man, Dr. Frankenstein, right, was so terrified of her power that he tore her apart before she was even created, was aborted, and then drowned into the bottom of the sea in a basket with a bunch of stones. Because you cannot let women speak. You cannot let them be powerful, right? And it wasn't until The Bride of Frankenstein that the bride actually made a sound. And so the Bride of Frankenstein's become a feminist manifesto. She's become a feminist icon, which is really quite fascinating. And I think for the poetry, so horror, for poetry, I think poetry is the perfect voice for a domestic violence survivor or for speaking out against domestic violence, because when violence happens against you, it is short and quick. It can last for a long time, but when you're hit or you're choked or you're dragged across the floor, it's a very strong and visceral experience, and it's fast. It happens so fast. You won't even believe how fast it happens. And so because of the format of poetry, because of its structure, the reader is then also experiencing what the victim is experiencing. And it's because of the truncated form. It's a perfect platform to talk about these things. And it's also digestible in a way where people can read something and then get up and walk away. If you have a scene or a short story that's about violence against women, right? Those scenes have to be fairly short. You can't hold that out for a long time. It becomes unsustainable. And so I think with the poems, it's a perfect platform because you can actually read one, right? And then walk away and carry it for a little bit. And it resonates in a way that I think longer fiction can't quite do. It's like a picture, right? It's like a picture.
And what you said about brevity, it's definitely it for violence against women, because if you think about all the different types of violence against women, not just domestic violence, you think of sexual violence, you think of female infanticide, feticide, female genital mutilation. All these are actually relatively brief events, occurrences, but the trauma that is caused is lifelong. So hopefully when you address this using poetry, the poem might be brief, and it's the briefest form of the literary arts. It will stay with the reader for the rest of their life. I'm going to say now that when Lindy sent me the poems to read through, I couldn't read them in one sitting. I had to read a few, stop, go and do something else, and sort of mull over it, and then come back and read it again, because it actually is. If anyone who's watching this hasn't bought their copy of it, just two things. One is a trigger warning, because some of the poems in there are so powerful and they're so evocative of violence against women. And I'm going to say this now as someone who's worked for almost 15 years in the anti-violence against women movement. A lot of it is so true. Like, it might be fiction, it might be poetry, but it gets to the heart of the truth about what violence against women is. So two things: one, trigger warning for the book, and also small doses. Small doses is good.
I like to say there's 112 poems in this book, so it's 112 visits through this book. I think each one can be read and savored isn't the word I would like to use, but let it settle with each poem, because there's power, and most of them are not fiction. I mean, these are women who are writing from experience that they've experienced, their daughters have experienced, their mothers. These are a lot of truths, 112 truths on the page, and so I think that they deserve room to breathe. So it's a powerful but definitely very intense collection.
I think if anyone who has empathy and who has a heart will feel it. And I'm hoping that people who never really thought about violence against women, or thought about domestic violence, or thought about how other people are impacted by it, how communities are impacted by it, because some of the poems actually address communities as well, the impact on communities, that if you read, even if you read just one poem from the book, I hope that you start thinking a little bit more about it. It's not a pleasant topic, but someone you know in your life, in your family, in your circle of friends, in your community, in your country will have faced this. So it's a good read, it's a thoughtful read, but also I hate to say this word, but it's also a difficult read in some ways. But it's good to stretch. It's good to stretch your compassion. It's good to stretch your empathy. Karina, what were you going to say?
Real quick, in 2019, there were a couple of artists who did an art exhibit, and each panel was for International Women's Against Violence Against Women Day, something like that. I have it somewhere, but it was called Tears of Aphrodite. And they had art that was made, all these flowers, and each flower represented a woman, and each panel had 200 flowers on it. And that's how many women are violated in France each day. And so they had 200 women are
That they
raped
know
every day in
of.
France. Yeah, it was the Feminist Collective Against Rape. And so they had these panels up, and it was like the poems are like those panels, right? Like they're beautiful. But then they represent all these different things. That's all. I just wanted to add that little bit.
Absolutely. I think that the beauty of them is important too, because they are absolutely stunning in the imagery, and they are exactly that. They're so accessible, so you can pick one up and you could be in a weight room somewhere and pick it up and actually feel moved. And sometimes it's just one line. It'll be that one line that is that kernel of truth for you, and you can recognize something in it. And that was the thing for me when reading through these poems. Sometimes it'll just be one line. It's like, we need this poem for this line in particular. And you know, I often say this, and I say it sort of flippantly, but you know, poems are the Brussels sprouts to, you know, prose is cabbage. You know, it's this big dense thing, a cabbage, but you know, it's just a tiny little Brussels sprout of truth. And so, you know, if you don't like cabbage, you can manage a Brussels sprout, right? It's something that we can manage. It's manageable, and especially for young people and people who are very, very busy, and they can't squeeze that solace in somewhere. But you get one moment, you know, in the car while you're waiting for the kids to come out from school or something. That might be the moment where you can digest, absorb, settle, let these poems settle, and that meaning is extremely powerful, but also beautiful. As Karina says, they are absolutely beautiful. So I hope people will enjoy them.
Well, you know, poetry as a literary form has been experiencing a renaissance of sorts in the 21st century. So we have the rise of popular women poets such as Linda D. Addison, Cynthia Pelayo, Amanda Gorman, and Rupi Kaur. Do you think this will help our book with their high profile, with the rising profile of female poets?
I do. I think it's incredible to see. I cannot write poetry to save my life. I am far too long-winded. So my last novel clocked in at 100,000 words when it was supposed to be 90. But I think that, you know, the women who are out there writing poetry and the poems that are going out, Linda Addison is incredible. She wrote the foreword for our first collection, Under Her Skin. Cynthia Pelayo is a force. Seen as incredible. So I think, and there's so many other female poets, and I'm more familiar with the horror side, of course, but there's Donna Lynch, Stephanie Wojtowicz, Sarah Tantlinger. There's just name after name after name. Obviously, Lee and Karina, two of the most incredible poets I know. I think giving voice to poetry and giving opportunities to poets, right? It's such an underappreciated form of art today. And so being able to see those poets take off, and, you know, those books get recognition, those words get recognition, those women get recognition. You know, what is it? A rising tide floats all ships. I don't know. We're bad today at quotes, but you know, all of these voices pull all the others, and they support all the others, and they create opportunities. So I love seeing all of the rise of popular women poets today.
Yeah, and I always think of, you know, when I think of male poets versus female poets, I keep thinking of the difference between Emily Dickinson and T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was really long-winded. Like, his poems would go on for pages and pages. It's not that poetry in general can be very brief, and Emily Dickinson is one of the best practitioners of tucking really authentic truths into very brief poems. I was just thinking about all of you was speaking just now. I was just thinking about the difference in the male gaze and the male voice and the female gaze and the female voice in poetry. And I think that if anyone picked up Under Her Eye, they'll start, and if they are a poetry fan, and if they love poetry, they'll start to see the difference, even if they haven't seen it before. Because I think that's one of the most important things that Under Her Eye gives us as well, which is poetry with a female gaze, poetry from the women's point of view, because we don't get that very often, not yet. It should be standard, it should be mainstream, but we're not getting it quite yet. So anyway, let's get down to the nuts and bolts of storytelling and poetry writing for horror poets who would like to tackle violence against women as a theme in their poems instead of relying on tropes, the typical violence against women tropes. So now, what are some of the techniques that horror poets can use to turn toxic tropes that are rife with sexism, misogyny, and the violence against women on their head, and even use them to send a message to the reader that violence against women is never acceptable? So let's start with Karina.
Oh, I wanted to flip it the other way around. When it comes, with tropes in poetry or we're talking about poetry. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. I think what I love about poetry is it's subversive. People don't expect us to talk that way, and we can talk in a way that they don't. People who are against us don't necessarily see. So it creates a community, and then once there's many people who are doing it, then there's a strong voice. It's not just one little voice, it's a bunch of voices. So with tropes, and I actually play with them, honestly. I think using them, drawing attention to them is what becomes interesting. Sylvia Plath, one of my favorite poems of hers is Lady Lazarus. It's a suicide poem, but at the very last stanza, it's out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air. If that isn't a trope that's been turned upside down on its head, I don't know what it is. And Stephanie, in her opening poem, she also uses that trope with the lipstick. It's a gorgeous line with the lipstick rolling off on the hand. It's taking the actual thing that happens, the thing that we expect, and then turning it into a thing of beauty and power. And that's not what most readers are looking for. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I've got.
Okay, Lee, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I'm just trying to find that line. You look for it, Karina. Well, look, I think, first of all, going back a step, I think we need to remember that while these are all women, this is 112 women poets with completely different experiences, and we've got such a diverse group of women. There are older women, younger women, we've got some trans women, we've got women of color with different life experiences living in different countries. I think we've got 6 or 7, 8, 10 countries, I can't remember, represented. So there really is a breadth of voices, and I think that gives this power, because when we talk about women's voices, we are not unique in that, yes, we have some similarities, but we also walk these different lives. And so I think the richness of this collection is somewhat in its diversity, even though we are all women. So I think that's one thing to say. In terms of the tropes, look, I think these women have couched things in absolutely beautiful metaphor and structure. They've used imagery to die for, and Karina talked about the lipstick one, and I agree with her, because that line stood out for me. And this is what I mean about sometimes it's just a single line, a single image. Karina's used the planetary image in her own poem, that being powerful and separate and different and new, and I think there's so much hope in there. So I think you're right, Karina. It's about being subversive, turning these tropes on their head, finding original ways to say the same thing but different, and again, we're all women, but we're all different. And so that, I think we've played into that. I think women in this collection have really played to their strengths and given us their authentic, powerful narratives, that just by using all of the writing techniques that they know, and these are very powerful writers. I think we've got a few emerging writers as well, but just the beauty of their language is the real strength of it. So, and yes, you're right about community. Oh, go there. That's right. It's the community that's evolved out of this, because people are recognizing themselves in someone else's work, and they've resonated. And so you reach out, don't you? Oh, this was wonderful. I so enjoyed this. And I just really hope that they will touch other people that don't necessarily have access to the help and the support that some of us do. So,
Lindy, what do you think?
I agree with my friends, with my sisters here. I think one of the most interesting things about these collections, about Under Her Eyes, it talks about deeply personal, very dark, difficult subject matters. And so I don't know if it's a trope flip, but there's nothing wrong with poems about flowers and love and life and sky, those pretty topics that women are supposed to write about. And what I see when we bring women in a room and we say, let's talk about these difficult conversations and these issues that we're not supposed to talk about, what comes out is passion and power and fury and in beauty. And it's so incredible to witness that speech and those words that come out. When we released Under Her Skin, one of the reviews I saw from a male reviewer on a very popular horror site was he called the book, a woke book of women's drivel. And I was like, oh, that's very thanks, I guess. Like, I don't know. Like, it was interesting to see their reactions from the people, other people, and it just made me more passionate than ever about producing these works, about writing these poems, about sharing them out there, because it's not woke women's drivel, it's screaming women's voices being heard for the first time. And that's not going to be pretty for people to hear. It's not supposed to be, and it shouldn't be. So, not at all the question you asked, Regina, but that's my thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this now, really frankly. If these men are disturbed by the poems, issuing denials like that, calling it names, calling the book names, calling us names, it's high time we made them uncomfortable. Exactly. They've been comfortable for so long. They've been comfortable for centuries. The patriarchy has coddled them, has told them that, everything that's just handed to them, that they're entitled to everything. And then now that we're making them uncomfortable, whether it's through poems, whether it's through novels, whether it's through documentaries and movies, through art, making them uncomfortable is a good thing. Mm-hmm. They might have tantrums. That sounded like a tantrum, the whole woke thing. I mean, we all know in the past year, a few old men in horror had tantrums, very public tantrums, and were taken to task by the horror community, including their peers, about their tantrums. But I think it's a good thing. If the book, if Under Her Eye did not provoke some of these tantrums, I would say, is the book actually doing its job? I think it is, because for someone to be so provoked that they actually took time to write that, it's working on that level.
So welcome to our experiences, right? So it's a little bit of the this poem maybe got under his skin. If I have questions about it, but no, you're absolutely right. It's women have been silenced, shut up, hurt, whatever. We can assign any verb because every one of them have happened. And when their voices come and their truths come, it's going to unsettle and it's going to disturb and provoke and, whatever. And it's time, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I say that as well because the Pixel Project does receive poison pen letters from men. angry men, and I read them and then I just delete them from the main email account. I don't want anyone else to read or hear that poison. But I take it as a sign that we're actually on the right track. I mean, what else would enrage them than pointing out what's going on and how they have how they have a part to play in that. And if they feel guilty and they start going on the attack.
Yeah, well, one of the things is that, even in the literary world, poetry is, we're not rock stars. We have some rock stars, but we're not, it's poetry, while it is extremely accessible, we're not making millions and millions of dollars to throw at good causes, unfortunately. And I think that is kind of interesting when you talk about, people trying to silence us, because no one really silences the men. Now, I'm just kind of thinking of, if you think of song lyrics as being poetry, which they are in a sense, they're poems set to music. And there have been some pretty, misogynist and gaslighting song lyrics out there. And I was reading, actually, just not recently, an article in Rolling Stones about, is it Ryan Adams, who is a singer? He was involved with a number of women, and there's been an analysis there of his song lyrics and how they've gaslighted women and put them down and been derogatory. And yet this man has had, is making a lot of money selling music, and people are listening to his music and singing the songs. And I believe he went back and changed some lyrics because the women are gaining power. And so I think it's really interesting to look at that. We should not just listen to, read and consume women's stories, but we should actually be listening to men's stories and the poetry that they're putting out and calling them on it. Because we are in the past we've seen a lot of that kind of language going into songs which are poems that are sung and performed. If women's poems are full of angst and trauma and sadness and poignancy, there is this kind of power where men who are being heard and getting paid lots of money to be heard, their words are telling the opposite story. And I think it's maybe time to start calling them out on those. If this is women's drivel, then how about we start calling out some of that men's drivel to those people in power? I'm sorry, I'm getting on my high horse here.
Just simply, it actually it dovetails with what I've been reading recently, which is BTS is one of the biggest bands in the world, and South Korean feminists have been calling them out because in the past they've had songs with the lyrics that are very, very misogynistic. And so South Korean feminists, they have been calling them out on it. They actually, there was no response from them. But here's what's interesting. After that, BTS actually, in an interview, said that after that, they started running their songs past feminist scholars to make sure that they hadn't said anything that they didn't know that they had said.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting. I thought, yeah. Karina, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that I don't think that we're going to change the abusers. I don't think that that's going to happen. What I do think that projects like this does is let people know who are being abused that they're not alone and that they do have a voice. And knowing you're not alone in this situation is what's really important, right? And knowing that there are other people who have felt the way you have felt. When I was volunteering over at Tessa, which is our domestic violence shelter here, where they actually saved my life, they had to educate the people who are volunteering that there isn't a stereotypical domestic violence victim, that they can be educated, they can have money, and so there's still a stereotype there, and then people believing that they deserve it, right? And so when we start seeing stories like this, it's what all I write about is violence against women. When we start seeing stories like this, that the most important thing to me has been is when people have reached out and said, I know what you're talking about, I've been there, or thank you, or I'm not alone. And that's why a book like this is so important, right? It lets people know that their stories are important too. Right?
Yeah,
And we have had some of those stories come in, haven't we, Lindy? And obviously we can't talk about those, but we have had some people reach out and give us those stories. So that is the power of it, isn't it? That's
And then when we're all together, when you know you're not alone, all of a sudden
Yeah.
you have power. When I went to the courthouse, I had a line of women police officers and detectives who stood between me and my abuser so he could not make direct eye contact to me. That is the most power you can ever have, is having people who will stand in a line between you and the person who's trying to hurt you. And we're doing that with words. That's pretty powerful, I think.
yeah,
And I would love to add on briefly. I mean, there's so much change and transformation that needs to happen on a large scale, right? We talk about the industry, the whatever, but change starts small, and those most meaningful changes can be one person. And as Lee mentioned, we've had lots of folks, women who are even in the collection have reached out, shared their stories, and talked about it, and they, have found paths forward. They've found friends, sisters, family, community, strength in numbers and support, both through the other women in the collection, through the resources provided by the Pixel Project. And I think those little, one-person changes should not be relegated to, other stuff. Those are the important changes: saving women's lives, empowering women with resources to get away from these situations if they're in them, to stand up, fight back, escape, whatever is appropriate for them. Those are the changes and the impacts that are most important, most meaningful. And I think, that's, we could win the Nobel Prize tomorrow with this collection, which would be incredible. Yeah, we'd all be super thrilled, but we could also save one woman's life, and that would be worth it.
Yeah,
exactly.
and under her eye, it's like giving the devil his due, in a sense that we tucked in a page and a half of resources for women and girls at the back of the book. So, if you know someone who's suffering from domestic violence or the aftermath of sexual violence, buy the book or borrow it from the library. I think some libraries are acquiring the book as well, and we're going to be looking into that and pushing and reaching out to libraries, and and just put a note in there. Their abusers won't know, because it's a book, it's a storybook, it's a poetry book. Who cares, right? But they can flip to the back. You can put a note in there and say, "Look at the back," and you'll get a whole list of resources in your region. And you can search, and there's a particular resource in there called the No More Directory, which is a collaboration between the No More Foundation, the United Nations, and the World Bank. And they put together this incredible website where you can go in and you type your country into the search box, and it pulls up a list of helplines, hotlines, women's department, women and children's departments in governments if they have them, women's organizations, women's human rights defenders who also work on this individually, and they pull it up, and you can get help wherever you are, in the world. And I think 220 countries or something like that. Anything that's that's registered with the UN, any country and territory that's under the UN. And if you are in the North America, if you are in the US and Canada, please do go to domesticshelters.org. You can type in your state, and you can type in your zip code, and they will pull up a list of your nearest shelters, your nearest women's organization, helplines, hotlines, emails, text numbers, anything that you need to get help. So go get help. Karina,
do it on a public computer. People don't. If you're being abused, don't do it on your home computer. You can be.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Use the library computer.
Use the library where they can't track you.
Yeah, and librarians are very helpful. And that's why we want to get the book into libraries. If you're a librarian watching this, please reach out to Black Spot Books, or reach out to the Pixel Project, or reach out to any of us, and we can sort it out. Black Spot Books would be the one. If you're a librarian watching this, Black Spot Books would be the one to reach out to see if you can order the book. And Lindy will be ecstatic to help.
Yeah, as I was sharing in our green room this morning, Black Spot Books is fully distributed. So if you are a librarian or bookstore buyer, whoever you buy your inventory from, you'll find Under Her Eye in your available catalog. And I am tremendously excited to see, of course, readers buying the book, but I'm seeing libraries, universities, literature foundations also picking up the book. And I think that's incredible, because that means those books are being bought for people who maybe not able to buy them for themselves, or to be taught and spoken about in places where these conversations happen. So yes, absolutely. Reach out to me.
Yeah. So we've got 5 minutes to go. So we just have one more question. Need a quick answer from all three of you, and then we'll put up a little slide to show everyone where to go get Under Her Eye, get more information about Under Her Eye. So the final question of the day is a really obvious question, but we ask this of all our guests. Well, we modified it for this session. So what do you think poets can do to help stop violence against women, and why do you support the cause? Let's start with Lindy, and then we'll just go clockwise.
Lee, you got lucky. What can poets do? Keep writing, keep talking, keep sharing your voice. There are other women, there are communities here for you. We want to hear your story, we want to hear your voice, and there are places to take it. And so when I'm not a poet, so write whatever it is that you write it. Don't stop, keep talking. That's what you can do.
Lee?
Yes, I think Lindy said it. I mean, there is so much power in poetry, and there's also safety and distance. So I think that, yes, poets should keep writing, use their beautiful language to tell the truth, really, to tell the truth and put it out there. And the further we spread it, the better chance we have of getting it in the hands of the people who need it. So keep writing.
So Karina will have the last word.
All right. Trauma, when you experience trauma, there is a distance, there is a lens that goes between you and the experience that you had. And so poetry gives you another lens to look at what has happened to you or what has happened to somebody you love. I say go personal. For me, I looked at my name. I found out that it was part of my body. I also found out it's a star in a constellation in the southern hemisphere that's part of the Argo, which is a constellation. And in that poem, I found hope. All right. I took back my voice. I took back my experience. I turned it into something that he would have never enjoyed at all. And that was that I'm powerful for writing down my experience and for sharing it with others. And so I hope you do the same. I think it's very important. And I think that your stories are important. Yeah. Together we can do a lot.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now, thank you for being with us today, all three of you. So I'm going to put a little slide up for everyone to have a look at the cover, a close look at the cover, and also find out where to go get information about that. So it's available in print and ebook format. So in print, it's in paperback. There are no hardback copies. It's a paperback edition, and it's an ebook from Amazon, IndieBound, Barnes & Noble, and other major booksellers worldwide from 7th November 2023. And I think, unlike Giving the Devil His Due, there's no end date for this. So, just keep, anytime you think you need some, if you've tried all sorts of ways to get through to someone or to get help to someone, and every other avenue has failed, and you really need to get life-saving information to them, try this book. And like I said earlier, tuck a note in and say, look at the back. And all proceeds from the book goes towards supporting the Pixel Project's anti-violence against women work. And for more information, please visit vesuvianmedia.com/underhereye/. So our producer today, Anusha, will put the link in the chat box for everyone to click to go through to have a look at to find out more details about the book. And just a quick recap, the table of contents in Under Her Eye includes poems by 112 acclaimed female and non-binary poets. Aside from Karina's poem, which you have just heard her read this session, the collection kicks off with Know to Be True by Bram Stoker Awards winner Stephanie M. Witovich. Is it Witovich or Witovich?
Witovich.
by Tovich. Yeah. And Lee and Karina were looking for that piece of imagery. They were talking about that, the lipstick imagery, and that comes from this poem. And also there's the writing assignment by HWA Lifetime Achievement Award winner and SFPA Grandmaster Marge Simon. And the book closes on a powerful note with a map of the backyard by Bram Stoker Awards nominee Jessica McHugh. And I'm going to share another little slide. So Lee mentioned giving the devil his due. Now, the paperback and ebook is no longer available, or will soon no longer be available once retailers take them off their sites. But the audiobook is going to be available for another year. So if you know someone who prefers to read using audiobooks, you can still get it from Audible, Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Kobo, Chirp, and other major audiobook retailers worldwide. And for more information about the audiobook, go to tinyurl.com/GTDHD audiobook R4P. This is case sensitive, everyone, so make sure that you take it down accurately. Anusha will put that in the chat box as well, so you can click through to learn more about the audiobook. And finally, two final things. If you want to learn more about the Read for Pixels campaign, you can go to bit.ly/readforpixels. And Anusha will put that link in the chat box as well. And if you want to find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, or if you want to get help, visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. Now, before we go, Lindy, Karina, and Lee, do you have any announcements? Anything coming up this holiday season, or anything that that's gonna kick off 2024?
Go ahead, Lindy.
Why is it always me?
Because you've got the projects coming. I know you have. I've seen the whole list of them coming.
I do have a lot going on in 2024. The two I'll mention is my debut horror novel, Bless Your Heart, comes out from St. Martin's Group in the US in April, and from Solaris in the UK in July. Black Spot Books also has our next Women in Horror anthology, Mother Knows Best, which speaks to abusive mothers, coming out just in time for Mother's Day in May 7th, 2024. And we have just confirmed our co-editor for our third Women in Horror Poetry Showcase that we'll be launching next year too. So if any poets are listening or want to get in on the good stuff, we'll be announcing that call for submissions at the top of the year.
Okay. Lee, do you have anything coming out next year?
Yes, I do. I have my first solo prose poetry collection, Fox Spirit on a Distant Cloud, coming from the Cuba Press in March. So I'm really excited about that. But I believe the film, my feature film that I co-wrote, is coming out next year. It's called Grafted, and it's an Asian women, weird science, diaspora tales. So really excited about that too. I have some other news, but those will do.
Okay, Karina,
Yeah, my debut short story collection, Dead Girl Driving and Other Devastations, is coming out.
So good.
Coming out in February next year. Yeah, with Trepid Audio Press.
Oh, congratulations! It's so exciting.
Yeah, it's
I will admit, I've had a chance to read that collection, and it is stunning in every possible way.
Yes, it's exquisite. I really enjoyed it too. We're a bit lucky, aren't we, Lindy?
We are very lucky. Absolutely.
And finally, to round things up, please do, if you're watching this and you're new to the Pixel Project, please do follow us on Facebook and on Instagram. And we're no longer on Twitter because of Elon Musk. But we are going to be on Blue Sky. We are on Blue Sky, but we're going to be active next year once they ramp up. And also follow us, because next year in March 2024, for International Women's Day, Women's History Month, and Women in Horror Month, we are going to be sharing the readings of 31 of the Under Her Eye poets. We have recorded 31 readings, and if you want to hear them performed, and some of the poets are really, truly beautiful readers. follow us, because we will be sharing one per day on our social media channel, via social media channels in March 2024. So anyway, so good. Thank you all so much for being with us today, especially if you're in the US and it's Thanksgiving weekend. We really appreciate you being here. And please have a great weekend and have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Mhm.